Take Bill Crystal off the screen. Okay, okay. What if I replaced Bill Crystal with somebody even worse?
This is my very specific question for you, right? Is that you're an investor in AI. You're deeply invested in Palantir, in military technology, in technologies of surveillance.
Give us Bill Crystal back. You want Bill Crystal back? Yeah, that's what I thought. That's what I thought. There is good news, though. It would be a funny bit for me to cut to somebody worse than Peter Thiel, but you kind of can't, can you? This is kind of the end game in terms of bringing wretched, inhuman pieces of shit on screen. I jumped right to the end. There's no more... Elon's worse than anyone. Nah, Peter Thiel's way worse than Elon. Because Elon's embarrassing. Elon's cringe. He's also too stupid to know what's going on. I mean, all these people are stupid, but Peter Thiel is a lot more. Also, like, Elon wishes he co-founded Palantir. Okay?
Technologies of warfare and so on, right? And it just seems to me that when you tell me a story about the Antichrist coming to power and using the fear of technological change to sort of impose order on the world, I feel like that Antichrist would maybe be using the tools that you were building, right? Like, wouldn't the Antichrist be like, great, you know, we're not going to have any more technological progress, but I really like what Palantir has done so far, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
what the f is he talking about? Peter Thiel and everyone like him has like a quasi-religious view of their own importance. Presumably, he thinks that he's here to fight the Antichrist or something. Part of this is because they're megalomaniacs. Part of it is because they're genuinely like very mentally ill. But a lot of it is also, it's like an expression of the juvenility of their mindset. The idea that the world is f***ed up, but only they can fix it, you know? It's not even fascism, not really. Fascism is to them just like a convenient step, something that they don't even like acknowledge it exists in itself, right? They just think of it as like a mobilizing mechanism they use to achieve power, after which everything will be fine. It's how a child thinks, you know what I mean? Like, if I was in charge, I could fix everything.
Isn't that a concern? Wouldn't that be the irony of history would be that the man publicly worrying about the Antichrist accidentally hastens his or her arrival?
Like, they're not actually religious. It's not actually religious belief. It's like Christian symbology used to tell a story, and it's the story of his like moral ascension, you know?
There are all these different scenarios. I obviously don't think that that's what I'm doing. I
mean, to be clear, I don't think that's what you're doing either.
What would happen to guys like this if they lost all their money? Suicide by cop, or they'd be like living under a bridge. People like this can't function in normal society, right? It's a wing of like sociopathy, or it's like it's a mental profile that is advantageous if you are, for one, lucky, because there's a bunch of people like this. Not all of them get to co-found Palantir. But also like venture capital, right? Silicon Valley. There are areas where stuff like this can thrive, where your like everyday megalomania comes across as genius to the interns that you bring on board to do the real work while you invest and, hey, get lucky. But in regular society, no, these people couldn't function.
Just interested in how you get to a world willing to submit to permanent authoritarian rule.
Well, but again, there are these different gradations of this we can describe.
Worth noting also is that by and large, these people are not actually that bright. Alex Karp is not that bright. Peter Thiel is not that bright. Elon is profoundly stupid. Curtis Yarvin is not that bright. I really should have taken the time to listen to him talk more, because reading that article of his where he said he was politically radicalized by what was it? Was it John Kerry and the Purple Heart? What was the political nothing story that he was like radicalized against the right, or sorry, against the Democrats about? I think it was something like that. Oh, the Swift boating thing. Yeah. Like nothing. Like to be mobilized by that, it's just, you're so shallow up here in your head. But that's how they all are, I guess.
But Is this so preposterous, what I've just told you, as a broad account of the stagnation that the entire world has submitted for 50 years to peace and safety? As
you got to bring back Professor Vaush segments. What did I do, Professor Vaush? What do you mean? Like when I talked about the history of X or whatever? I mean, I feel like we talk a lot. We talk a lot these days. I don't usually boil it up like concept focused. You talk about the news and you bring the concept to the news. You got to meet people where they're at, which I want to do a lot with Mamdani, by the way. You know, I want to do a lot with Mamdani. Mamdani's victory has been like a frankly, I feel vindicated because Mamdani has been like a vindication of so many things I've been saying for years, right? For one, charisma and message discipline matter a lot more than ideological purity. Mamdani is very ideologically pure, but that's not what won in the election. For two, you need to learn to be a patriot, okay? Mamdani loves New York City, all right? If he was running around saying like New York City is a corrupt capitalist establishment that siphons wealth from the poor and doesn't da-da-da, like he wouldn't get any votes. Obviously, you need to love the area that you're trying to improve. Otherwise, why the f would anyone vote for you? That shit's off-putting. You know, I think, a big one being like understanding where real leftist mobilization comes from. Because if you look at Mamdani's support, along with the support for Bernie Sanders, along with the support for like every leftist movement ever, poor people are actually not your allies, not meaningfully. The people you're looking for usually are privileged, dispirited, middle-class people, or whatever the social equivalent is, right? You want to win over the poor, the proletariat, the peasantry, the people who are quite poor, but oftentimes they're very dangerous as a political mass because they often seek to use the machinery of revolution to simply embolden and privilege themselves within the next regime. That is, they don't want to build anything liberatory. Their dreams of liberation are to become the next generation's oppressors. Which happens unfortunately quite often. You have like Enlightenment style intellectuals, academics, educated people who have big highfalutin dreams of socialism, but I'm afraid that like liberation to the average dumb rural hick does not look like communism. Liberation to them looks like the guy who owns the car dealership and has enough money to go to the strip club on the weekends. Everyone wants to be Stalin. Stalin was like that, wasn't he? Wasn't Stalin literally like a begrudging, a disprivileged, poor, like Lenin was an academic and an intellectual, and his writings were good. He was a monster, but his writings were good. And then Stalin is like actually grew up in poverty, like disprivileged, used the revolution as a way to personally better himself. He was a gangster. He was the muscle. Well, there you go, I guess. Yeah, many such cases. You understand what I'm talking about, though, right? Stalin robbed banks. Well, I'm not going after him for the stuff he was based over, okay? I'm just saying, like, it's important to know where your base of support is. Because how many lefties believe that socialism comes from, like, the poorest people in society? That has never been true. That has literally never been true. It's, like, almost always the base of that of that sort of like that, or I guess like the point from which that ideological influence flows is often from a small group of educated middle class people who then try to mobilize society broadly. Don't say that to the Maoists. The Maoists utilized the peasantry, but well, no, I think you can make this point about the Maoists as well. You absolutely could. Because, like, Mao's initial military gains were, yes, as like a revolutionary, and he mobilized the peasantry in the countryside and years and years and years. But Mao himself was well educated, right? And also, once the Cultural Revolution in China set in, who were the people making the decisions? It wasn't poor country folk. No, he wasn't? Okay, then I'm wrong on that. But when the Cultural Revolution set in China, it wasn't the poor country folk that were making decisions. It was students, right? It was like relatively well-to-do students, intellectuals, albeit young and therefore more detached from like the sort of hereditary culture, you know, who were weaponized oftentimes against the poor, against the peasantry. Though I not to say that I endorse this style of communist influence, but you know, it is often where it stems from. What's your issue with anarchists? I believe in bedtimes. I don't have an issue with anarchists. They're just like horrendously ineffective and often quite whiny. But like the underlying political influence or lens of analysis there, I think is good. It's defensible. So you know, it's not like real. They're not like MLs or whatever. They're not like fucking fascists, basically. No hate, no hate. But are you pro supply chains? That's what Marx meant when he said we have nothing to lose but our chains. The poor are also the least likely to be educated. Yeah, fundamentally, like the ability to imagine the world being better than it is like an education gap, which is why Marxists historically have been very like pro emancipatory education, right? Universal education. Everybody has to be educated. Because if you're not educated, you might have good tendencies interpersonally, but your range of imagination for political change is pretty dumb. It's not really you're not going to just like arrive at socialism from first principles. I think, man, there's a lot of stuff that lefties do that bug me. The idea that people just arrive at socialism. Like there's this idea that that experience with the inequalities of capitalism just begets, it just produces like socialist impulses in people that have to be suppressed. And to an extent, this is true. But I think that more often than not, when people encounter a bad system, their thought isn't, well, you should change the system. Their thought is, if I was in charge of that system, it would run better. You know what I mean? Think of how people have talked about the post office or the DMV, how people just like for like decades and decades have just kind of tossed their hand up and, you know, criticize something due to a brief engagement, or they fall in line with like a larger trend of criticism informed by, in many cases, nothing, you know? Or people think, well, the problem with corporations is just like the bitch-ass piece of shit working at the front desk. If you want a great example of the proletariat being detrimental to the revolution, look up Bolshevik interactions with the Russian peasants. All they were doing was killing landlords and fighting over the leftover land to be the next landlords. Yeah, we keep up at the second step there because it's like, does the average like peasant or whatever, do they want to kill their landlord? The answer to this, obviously, historically, is yes. But then like, they just want to be the next landlord. They don't like the thought in their mind is not, oh, well, let's emancipate society from landlords. Their thought is like, well, that guy, now it's my turn. That's just how people are. You have to bring people out of that. It takes effort, you know? Basically, what I'm saying is that it's okay to be very classist, and I think you should be. Marx would want you to.
This is 1 Thessalonians 5:3. The slogan of the Antichrist is peace and safety, and we've submitted.
You co-founded Palantir. Okay, I don't even know what we're looking at here. Peter Thiel is the Antichrist. Good. Good, solid, concise. Very good. I can 100% confirm this. Living in Russia, I've always been thinking of if only better people were in charge to fix these local issues. Only after getting more educated post the war, I had a more systemic thought approach to it. Yeah, it takes some education, you know? Also happened with slaves in antiquity. There were multiple instances where successful slave revolts just resulted in the new people in charge perpetuating slavery. Oh God, yeah, probably. I mean, for most of human society, I imagine that was like the outcome of a successful slave revolt. The only reason the revolution at Rojava worked was because the movement had a massive underground education campaign for 20 years. Just don't get very far with the proletariat on their own. It's weird how humans gravitate towards authoritarianism, but also policies that help out their neighbors. Humans gravitate towards reconstructing tribal social structures because that is literally what we evolved to be in. Petty but limited authoritarianism help out the people around you. So you have these contrasting values that make sense in a primitive society but don't make sense today, you know? It is literally monkey brain shit. Yeah. Like in a tribal society, you do often have a degree of authoritarian rule from like the elder or whatever. It would vary from the tribe. There were tons of tribes, I'm sure. But like, it's not like tribes were run, you know, democratically in the way we today understand democracy, right? You might have input, but ultimately you still have like the big kahuna. in charge, but you still have very pro-social tendencies. I think people gravitate back towards this, you know? And I think that a lot of the authoritarianism we see people reflect when they challenge existing authoritarianism systems, the idea that like, well, if you kill your landlord, you just become the next one, is people regressing back to that in their head. Like, the previous chieftain was bad, I will be a good one. But like, you don't think, what if this tribe had no chieftain? Because that'd be ridiculous. Like, you don't even, that conception doesn't even enter your mind, right? Like, it's a role that exists naturally as a consequence of the needs of the environment. So you can't kill the landlord and then go like, well, that's it then, because that doesn't make sense. It's not intuitive. It was the kahuna of Trump, Musk, Coe, and Thiel. I'm talking about how regular people think in power structures in their day-to-day life. I'm not talking about like broader political systems. I'm saying that people, I think in their heads, they kind of model their immediate environment around an understanding of politics and social order that make the most sense tribally, but don't necessarily make sense in the modern complex world. It's like an impulse you have to get over. It is literally tribalism. Do you think there's credence to the vanguard theory then? What do you mean the vanguard theory? You mean like having a vanguard party? No, because every revolution or all social change will be motivated and largely built by a small group of highly educated and influential people. But there's a huge difference between that, which is just a fact of life, and building a vanguard party, which is meant to be like a political apparatus that represents the working class, but is itself a distinct class marker. And this, I think, is absolute nonsense. I think this is absolute nonsense. You know, vanguardism does not, like the first thing you do, the whole point is to build a society that is equitable because you no longer have a class divide, and then you immediately make a class divide. You know? No, I don't believe in this. But you don't need to believe in vanguardism in order to acknowledge the fact that you will have some like major movers in any revolution. You know, like people like Mamdani, if you will, you know, people who are obviously like on the fucking ball when it comes to charisma and being thought leaders, but that doesn't necessarily mean they then go on to form like the, you know, exclusionary Mamdani party of which only selected insiders can join that represents it. And they occupy like a totally different class system, right? It's like how in America, being a member of a party doesn't really mean much, right? Like you join the Democrats or Republicans, you still vote, however, it doesn't really mean that much. Basically just like who emails you to ask for money. Basically, it doesn't really change that much. Whereas being a member of the Communist Party in the Soviet Union, it was a huge deal, right? Depending on in what way you were a member, that could potentially, you know, I mean, you could be like set the fuck up in your life, right? It's a totally different class character to the way you engage with society and the economy. The Communist Party was the only way for upward mobility. Yeah, and that's the fucking problem. I mean, that's what I'm, describing. That isn't what a vanguard party is by definition. The role of a vanguard is to agitate and educate. Yeah, okay, but like, if we took the dicks out of our mouth, sorry. But like in practice, that's what it ends up being. If you want to have like a group of highly educated, you know, movers and shakers, that's fine. I just don't see why you have to like make it official. Why codify that? Why make that like an institutional force when you can just have people within the existing class structure of one class, just doing their best, you know? The Zapatistas had the best thing to say about vanguards. I shit on all the revolutionary vanguards of this planet. A letter to the Basque Liberation Movement, ETA. Excellent, excellent.